On World News Tonight, vaccine scarcity. WHO warns nations getting a third booster shot as some struggle to get their first. COVID concerns. Children who are not eligible to get vaccinated now under the high risk of COVID. Climate calamity. The US faces a barrage of new weather catastrophes as Mother Nature rages on. Shakespearean era. Period acting comes to life as garden theatres come back.
From the global resources of the Darana Media Network, this is the Darana World News Tonight. Now reporting from Studio 24 in Colombo, here's Anuradhi Wickramasinghe.
Good evening and thank you for joining with us on World News Tonight. We start off today's coverage from the COVID crisis. The WHO says that rich countries should not be ordering booster shots for their vaccinated populations, while other countries have yet to receive their vaccines, and the Delta variant was becoming dominant, and many countries had yet to receive enough vaccine doses to protect their healthcare workers.
Globally, COVID vaccine doses remain relatively scarce, but some nations are set to give out third shots. The World Health Organization calling on countries to stop booster campaigns, saying they are taking the world hostage.
While many countries haven't even started vaccinating, and another country has already vaccinated majority of its population, the 2 doses, and now moving to a third dose, which is the booster, it's really seriously disappointing. It doesn't even make any sense.
Vaccine maker Pfizer says it will ask U.S. and European regulators to authorize booster shots. It claims a third dose, 6 months after initial inoculation, can decrease risk of infection and fight the spread of the Delta variant. Pfizer briefed American officials on its findings Monday. The U.S. and Europe say the science doesn't support boosters yet, but they will be ready if needed. A few nations are already giving boosters or planning to. Israel is offering third doses to adults with weak immune systems, Indonesia handing them out to medics. And the UK and France are planning booster campaigns for the fall. Dozens of nations still have fewer than 10% of their populations fully protected against COVID. The WHO says Pfizer and Moderna should instead be directing doses to Africa and nations with very low vaccine coverage.
Meanwhile, the United States is reviewing the need for a third COVID booster shot among residents who have already been vaccinated, but needs to see more data to know if additional shots could raise people's risk of serious side effects. On the other hand, there is a spike in cases of the virus amongst children.
After a private Zoom meeting with Pfizer Monday night, today the CDC and FDA say there's still not enough evidence Americans need a booster. The nation struggling to get 98 million Americans their first shot, much less their third. And now there's growing concern over protecting the 28 million school-age kids under 12 who are still likely months away from qualifying for a vaccine before heading back to campus.
If you're not vaccinated, I do prefer that they wear masks.
Parents say they're frustrated by the conflicting messages and lack of planning. The CDC says any student not vaccinated needs a mask at school, but most states have no uniform plan to require them. Of the 25 million children old enough for vaccination, roughly a third are fully inoculated. Any outbreaks could lead to closures. With nearly 20,000 new COVID infections reported in children last week, the state health officer in Mississippi says 10 children there are currently on life support because of the Delta variant. Clusters of cases at summer camp are fueling new worry when school returns. There could be a fall surge. As Delta forces some hospitals to reopen COVID wards, cases are on the rise again in 27 states. After outbreaks in rural and mostly unvaccinated communities, a troubling number of infections are now being detected in cities like St. Louis, New York, and Los Angeles. Tonight, an evolving virus with an emerging threat, just as the youngest unprotected Americans get ready to return to the classroom.
Australian authorities extended a lockdown in Sydney today by at least 14 days after 3 weeks of initial restrictions failed to stamp out an outbreak of COVID-19 in the country's largest city. To give us an update on this, we have Other Darana World News special correspondent Timothy Phillip joining us now from Melbourne in Australia. Timothy?
Yes, Anurag. New South Wales State Premier Gladys Berejiklian said restrictions would need to remain in place until at least July 30th. After she reported that there were 97 new locally transmitted cases, representing a slight increase in daily infections from a day earlier. Of the 97 new cases, 24 people were infectious in the community. Berejiklian has repeatedly said that the lockdown that has been in place since June 26th will only be lifted when the number of newly reported cases that were circulating in the community while infectious were close to zero. The shutdown has now been extended on 2 occasions after the restrictions failed to curb daily case numbers. Total infections since the first was initially detected in the city's eastern suburbs in mid-June now stand at just under 900. 2 deaths have been reported, the first for the country this year. Back to you, Anna.
Thank you. That was Other Darana World News special correspondent Timothy Phillip reporting from Melbourne in Australia. With just over a week away from the Games, the pressure is intense for the IOC with the mixed opinions on hosting the event. On the ground, we have Other Darana World News special correspondent Rasita Chandradasa reporting from Tokyo in Japan to give us the latest.
Well, Anurag, let us start with the all-important spectator issue. With the stakeholder meeting on last Friday between the IOC, the government organizing committee, as well as the Tokyo City, the organizing committee finally declared that Tokyo 2020 Olympic would be spectatorless. That means all the events that are planned to held in Tokyo will have no spectators. Even though this is 2020 Tokyo Olympics, there will be some events outside of Tokyo. For example, there will be some baseball and softball games in the Fukushima and some football games in Miyagi in Tohoku area as well as Shizuoka, south of Tokyo. Some of the governors, including the Fukushima governor, declared that all their events would be spectatorless as well, so they will not allow any spectators. However, the Miyagi prefecture and Shizuoka prefecture, they declared that they will go according to the plans. That means 50% capacity up to 10,000 spectators. So that means all the overseas visitors, including the Sri Lankans, if you want to be in the stadium and to see the games, you have to go to either Miyagi prefecture or to Shizuoka prefecture. The all-important president of the IOC, Thomas Bach, he's having a very hard time in Japan. While most of the people clearly says that he's not welcome, and they are even signing a petition calling a postponement of the cancellation of the event. Mr. Bach, as he planned, expected to visit Hiroshima and the atomic bomb dome on 16th. While there's another petition in the Hiroshima asking him not to visit the state and telling him that put the lives before the Olympics and asking for a postponement or a cancellation. While the athletes, thousands of them are arriving in Japan, so far that has been a smooth ride. Even though we hear some isolated cases of the PCR positives, we don't hear any massive cases of COVID and also any strain in the local health sector. We all set for a start on next Friday, and we'll be hoping to give the best coverage from the Olympic Stadium to our Darana viewers. Over to you, Anurag.
Yes, Rasita, we are also looking forward to the same. Thank you. That was Other Darana World News special correspondent Rasita Chandradasa from Tokyo in Japan. Let's go in for a short commercial break. More world news on the other side. Welcome back. Pennsylvania was hit with serious flooding, while historic heat fuels wildfires in the West. The extreme conditions show that the dangerous impacts of climate change are only intensifying, scientists warn.
In the Northeast, freak flooding. In a matter of hours, parts of Pennsylvania doused with up to 11 inches of rain, residents forced to flee their homes. Meanwhile, out west, historic heat, with the region's largest fire still only 0% contained. After 4 days of explosive growth, smoke from that fire in Oregon now clouding the skies over Utah. Extreme conditions leading to extreme concern, as scientists say climate change shows no signs of slowing its deadly rampage. So far this year, there have been $8 billion weather disasters, from the deadly Texas freeze in February to the heat wave that hit the Pacific Northwest, killing more than 200 and devastating the coastline, with hundreds of millions of mussels literally cooked alive. An event so extreme, scientists now say it would have been virtually impossible without human-caused climate change. Severe heat is drying out the West, with reservoirs reaching new lows. The parched conditions now fueling infernos across the region, making the fires bigger and more destructive. 2020 was a record fire season for California, but with more than twice as much scorched earth compared to this same time last year, tonight a record already on track to be broken.
President Joe Biden, under pressure from U.S. civil rights leaders, called it a national imperative to pass sweeping voting rights legislations that has stalled in Congress, but did not outline a path to overcome Republican opposition. Joe Biden blasts Republican efforts and calls it un-American.
Have you no shame?
In a passionate speech, U.S. President Joe Biden Tuesday assailed Republican efforts to restrict access to voting in a number of U.S. states and declared it was a national imperative to pass sweeping voting rights legislation that has stalled in Congress amid strong Republican opposition.
So hear me clearly. There's an unfolding assault taking place in America today, an attempt to suppress and subvert the right to vote and fair and free elections.
But Biden offered no path forward to get the legislation back on track in Congress, which is meant to counter new laws moving through Republican-controlled states to restrict voting, a push encouraged by Biden's Republican predecessor, Donald Trump. During his speech in Philadelphia, Biden, without naming him, took aim at Trump and his supporters for false claims that the 2020 election was stolen from the Republican former president through widespread voting fraud. Biden also made a searing critique of what he called efforts to undermine voting rights, likening them to past laws that prevented black people and women from voting in the United States. The voting rights legislation faces an uphill battle in Congress, where Biden's fellow Democrats have been stymied by Senate Republicans who blocked it from even being debated. Biden's focus on the subject, even if the legislation fails, enables him to rally Democratic voters as his party works to maintain control of Congress in the 2022 midterm elections.
Crowds clashed with police and ransacked or burned shopping malls in South Africa, with dozens reported killed as grievances unleashed by the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma boiled over into the worst violence in years.
Looters continued to ransack shopping malls and protesters clashed with police in several areas of South Africa on Tuesday. Violence triggered by the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma has evolved into an outpouring of anger over persistent poverty and inequality 27 years after the end of apartheid. Outnumbered police have appeared helpless to prevent attacks and the looting of businesses in Zuma's home province, KwaZulu-Natal, and Gauteng, where South Africa's biggest city, Johannesburg, is located. That's why the military was heading for flashpoints on Tuesday, and columns of armoured personnel carriers could be seen rolling down the highways. Police Minister Becky Kelly said the situation would not be allowed to deteriorate further. He said 757 people had been arrested so far and put the official death toll at 10, though according to state and provincial authorities, it's at least 30. The deteriorating situation points to wider problems and unfilled expectations that followed the end of white minority rule in 1994. A gulf between the haves and the have-nots has been widened amid the global health crisis. Restrictions have been repeatedly imposed on businesses, and in the first 3 months of the year, unemployment hit a new record high of 32.6%. On Monday night, President Cyril Ramaphosa warned that the unrest was only making matters worse. Zuma was sentenced to 15 months in prison for defying a constitutional court order to give evidence at an inquiry. It's investigating high-level corruption during his 9 years in office. Any confrontation with soldiers risks fueling charges by Zuma and his supporters that they are victims of a politically motivated crackdown.
France called on all its citizens in Afghanistan to leave the country over security concerns. The French embassy in Kabul said as the Taliban pressed on with a blistering offensive while foreign forces completed their withdrawal.
The stalls of this market litter the ground. These shoes a tragic reminder as a bomb blast ripped through Kabul on Tuesday, killing several people. No group has yet claimed responsibility for the attack. However, authorities have pointed the finger at the Taliban, who have intensified their onslaught over the last 2 months. Following the withdrawal of NATO forces, the insurgents have used the vacuum to gain ground against the powerless Afghan army. The latest developments have Western nations on edge, none more so than France, with the country's ambassador to Kabul recently saying security could no longer be guaranteed for French nationals. In order to catch the flight, 100 or so French nationals have been told to quickly report to the authorities. Afghan embassy staff and those in affiliated institutions have meanwhile been evacuated in recent weeks under the right of asylum. But for the moment, the French diplomatic mission in Afghanistan remains open.
We have some good news for you. Australian scientists say they have developed the holy grail of blood sugar testing for diabetics, a non-invasive strip that checks glucose levels via saliva. For diabetics, managing their blood sugar levels typically means pricking their fingers multiple times a day with a lancet and then placing a drop of blood on a testing strip. Understandably, some diabetes sufferers avoid the painful process by minimizing their tests. However, this latest test works by embedding an enzyme that detects glucose into a transistor that can then transmit the presence of glucose, according to Paul Dastoor, Professor of Physics at the University of Newcastle in Australia, who led the team that created it. He said the tests create the prospect of pain-free, low-cost glucose testing, which should lead to much better outcomes for diabetes sufferers. Professor Dastoor says that the technology could also be transferred to COVID-19 testing, and allergen, hormone, and cancer testing. Since the electronic materials in the transistor are inks, the test can be made through printing at a low cost. Welcome back. For more news, let's take you around the world in a minute. The US has strengthened its warning to businesses about the growing risk of maintaining business ties with China's Xinjiang province, citing forced labor and human rights abuses in the region. Residents in Yangon City lined the street with their oxygen cylinders as they wait for the arrival of an oxygen distribution vehicle to refill their tanks amid a surge in coronavirus cases in Myanmar. Demonstrators waving Cuban flags and calling for change on the communist-run island blocked a major highway and staged other protests in the Miami area in support of the wave of demonstrations that rocked Cuba. Pope Francis was continuing to recover from his intestinal surgery a day after the Vatican said he would be leaving Rome's Gemelli Hospital as soon as possible. The Pope, seeming in good condition, walked unassisted along the corridor of the ward, greeting children, parents, and doctors. All of the known websites associated with hacking group Revil have gone offline on the dark web, 4 days after President Joe Biden urged Russian President Vladimir Putin to take action to disrupt ransomware groups operating in Russia.
Websites by Russia-linked ransomware group REvil became unreachable on Tuesday, sparking widespread speculation that the group had been knocked offline. REvil has collected tens of millions of dollars in ransom payments in return for restoring computer systems it's hacked. In recent weeks, it claimed responsibility for a ransomware attack on U.S. IT firm Kaseya, affecting up to 1,500 businesses worldwide. It was unclear whether REvil's disappearance was a momentary fluke or whether the hackers had been removed from the internet by someone else. Vanishing acts are common in the ransomware world, where gangs tend to disappear and rebrand when they begin attracting too much heat. REvil has already been drawing top-level U.S. government attention, and pressure has been mounting on Washington to take more decisive action against REvil and similar groups. The U.S. has been hit by a string of high-profile hacks by ransom-seeking cybercriminals, including an intrusion into Colonial Pipeline, which disrupted gasoline deliveries across the East Coast. President Joe Biden hinted on Friday the U.S. could soon take more aggressive action on ransomware, saying it made sense to retaliate against the Russian servers used in those attacks. The White House declined to comment, while an attempt to reach REvil was unsuccessful.
And finally tonight, Britain's Royal Shakespeare Company opened an outdoor theatre with a new version of The Comedy of Errors, its first such full-scale production in front of a live audience in over a year. Based in playwright William Shakespeare's birthplace of Stratford-upon-Avon, the company known as the RSC built the Lydia and Manfred Gorvey Garden Theatre outside its Swan Theatre by the River Avon. The Comedy of Errors had been due to begin performances in April 2020, but the RSC, like theatres across Britain and elsewhere, had to close its doors to live audiences due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Under Prime Minister Boris Johnson's roadmap out of lockdown, entertainment venues in England have been welcoming audiences back since mid-May, though at 50% capacity. The RSC's Garden Theatre can sit 500 people or 310 with social distancing. One visitor to the new theatre, Jennifer Herrett from Sheffield, hoped the temporary space would reopen in summers to come, while others said they felt safe to be watching a show outside. In London's West End, major productions including hit musicals such as Jersey Boys and The Lion King have been waiting for July 19th to be able to fully reopen, as operating at 50% capacity is not financially viable. And that's all the news we have for you tonight. Suzanne Chanali will join you again tomorrow with another edition of World News. Until then, stay safe and have a great night.